So dangerous, provocative language being used along with a test of a weapon system at a time when tensions are at an all-time high. A great deal of messaging taken place. But remember, is nuclear war possible or is it too far-fetched? One of the world's most respected Russia watchers, a Harvard professor named Dr. Ravi Abdalal, has spoken exclusively to India Today's Rahul Kanwal, and he had this very ominous prediction to make.
Tactical nuclear strike is a possibility. Words that will echo through war rooms across the world. Not just random analysis, but the words of one of the world's most respected Russia watchers.
Engage with the world.
Harvard professor Ravi Abdalal, director of Davis Center for Russian and Eurasian Studies, an academic whose views on the world's biggest story is one of the most sought after.
Is not about Russia versus Ukraine, but about Russia versus the West. And for that logic, we need to think about what are the ways in which Russia and NATO could come into direct conflict that could lead to a nuclear exchange between the great powers, as opposed to a single tactical nuclear strike in Ukraine.
Professor Abdalal's world-exclusive interaction with India Today adds ominous urgency to the aura of nuclear threat surrounding Russia and Ukraine. His words come just a day after Russia's foreign minister, in his only interview so far in the war, played down the nuclear threat that has emanated consistently from Moscow.
The Russian military has these hypersonic missiles, which are good at evading missile defense systems. It has thermobaric weapons, these so-called vacuum bombs. As far as we know from the outside, the Russian military has used one of each, probably to demonstrate what they can do, but have not yet escalated to the widespread use of these really terrifying weapons, much less the possibility of a tactical nuclear strike on the territory of Ukraine.
There could be no winners in a nuclear war, and therefore nuclear war must never be launched.
Obviously,
Professor Abdalal is the second top-tier American academic to highlight the nuclear threat emerging from Russia. Last month, Princeton University's Dr. Zia Mir echoed the fear.
This is part of the script of the nuclear aid. So nuclear weapon states say this because they can, because they have nuclear weapons.
Away from the nuclear threat, Professor Abdalal also sees Ukraine's current weapon levels as only enough to keep its head above water.
The Ukrainian military, and indeed the Ukrainian civilians who have been waging this counteroffensive against the Russians, have perhaps been armed enough to achieve a kind of stalemate, though not enough to win the war.
More ominously, the Harvard professor predicts the longer the stalemate, the more destructive things could get, with newer weapons entering the combat mix.
But the longer the stalemate lasts, the more likely there will be escalation on the Russian side, using weapons that they have mostly not yet used in ways that will be difficult for the rest of us to watch and horrible for the Ukrainians to endure.
With only some indicators on where the war is headed and what the endgame is, the Harvard guru makes a pronouncement that provides shape to the next steps. That there's little chance of the war winding down soon.
President Putin has gambled his historical legacy on this war, which means that there is no backing down. There will be no end to this war until the Russian president feels that he can narrate some sort of achievement, both militarily and politically, from the war.
On India Today, the most sought-after academic and strategic minds provide their views first, allowing us and you, the viewer, navigate this emerging conflict. With Rahul Kanwal in Boston, Bureau Report, India Today.
Now, after back-to-back nuclear dares from Russia, a kind of rollback saying nuclear war is off the table, and now this sudden testing of the most capable Russian nuclear missile amidst the highest levels of tension in Ukraine. Here's a report telling you why the world is actually not very sure about what comes next and why it has reason to be worried. Unending invasion war, weeks of savage battle, countless deaths, cities in complete ruin. But no massive win to show on the ground for Russian President Vladimir Putin. Amidst the fierce fight back by Ukraine and biting Western sanctions, ominous signs for the world have emerged. Putin has resorted to the Brahmastra in his arsenal, the massive Russian stockpile of nuclear weapons, openly threatening a no-holds-barred nuclear war, refusing to rule out the use of nuclear weapons if there is an existential threat to Russia. Russia's foreign minister Sergei Lavrov had earlier warned that any Third World War would be nuclear and destructive. A threat repeated by the Kremlin with chilling resonance.
The outcome of the operation, of course, is not a reason for usage of a nuclear weapon. We have a security concept that very clearly states that only when there is a threat for existence of the state in our country, we can use, and we will actually use, nuclear weapons to eliminate the threat for the existence of our country.
Let me assure you, a responsible member of the international community committed to its obligations to non-proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. Russia is taking every possible measure to prevent Ukraine from getting nuclear weapons and respective technologies.
The nuclear saber rattling is one of many that Russia has openly indulged in. Just days into the Ukraine invasion, Vladimir Putin had put nuclear deterrent forces on high alert as a chilling warning to NATO and the West.
Dear colleagues, as you can see, not only Western countries take unfriendly measures against our country. In the economic dimension, I mean the illegal sanctions that everyone knows about very well. But the top officials of leading NATO countries allow themselves to make aggressive statements with regard to our country. That is why I ordered Defense Minister and Chief of General Staff to put Russian Army deterrence forces on high alert.
It has now emerged that Russia had even dispatched its nuclear ballistic missile submarines into the North Atlantic as the war raged in Ukraine. After their deterrent patrol, the submarines were quietly pulled back by the Kremlin. The West fears that Russia, suffering massive reverses in Ukraine's war theater, could resort to using tactical nuclear weapons, which are of a small yield but can devastate an entire city. In a bid to escalate the war and force Ukraine to agree to its terms on the negotiations table.
Allies agreed to supply equipment to help Ukraine protect against chemical, biological, radiological and nuclear threats. This could include detection equipment, protection and medical support, as well as training for decontamination and crisis management. We are also enhancing allies' preparedness and readiness for chemical and biological and nuclear threats.
A calculated nuclear gambit or plain brinkmanship to turn the tide in a war that has simply not gone Russia's way as expected. Whatever it may be, the Ukraine war triggering nuclear moves comes as a massive alarm bell for the entire world.
No need to choose Team Edward or Team Jacob.
Doesn't he own a shirt?
When you download and watch Tubi on your TV today.
Shalom.